For most of the 20th century, this company's name was almost a synonym for memory itself. If you photographed a birthday, a wedding, a first step, you almost certainly did it on their film. Their slogan promised the whole of photography in a single sentence. You press the button, they do the rest. They sold the cameras cheaply, and then sold the film and the paper and the chemicals and the developing over and over for a lifetime of moments. It was one of the most profitable arrangements in the history of American business. And then, in a windowless lab inside their own building, one of their own engineers built the machine that would erase all of it. A camera with no film. A camera that captured a picture as pure information that would never need paper or chemicals or a return trip to the store. It was crude, it was slow, and it was the future, the entire future, sitting on a workbench, a decade before almost anyone else would see it. What the company did next is the reason this is a story worth telling. They did not miss the digital revolution. They did not fail to notice it coming. They invented it, held it in their hands, understood exactly what it meant, and then chose to look away because the future they had just built threatened the fortune they were already making. This is the story of a giant that saw its own ending clearly, wrote it down, and walked toward it anyway. To understand the mistake, you first have to understand the machine that made the money. This company did not really sell cameras. It sold everything that happened after the camera. The camera itself was almost a giveaway, a simple box designed to do one thing: create demand for film. And film was the real product, a roll good for a few dozen pictures, bought again and again, then handed to a store to be developed on the company's paper with the company's chemicals, in one of the company's own laboratories. Every single photograph taken on that film was a small, repeating payment flowing back to one company. Multiply that by hundreds of millions of people across decades, and you have a river of money that seemed like it could never run dry. The business had extraordinary profit margins, not on the cameras, but on the endless consumable stream that followed. As long as people kept taking pictures on film, the money kept coming, and people took more pictures every year. It was, in its way, a work of genius. Give away the razor and sell the blades forever. The camera created a customer for life, and every birthday and holiday and vacation that customer ever photographed turned into revenue. But the same design that made the company so rich also quietly decided what it was allowed to become. A business that earns almost everything from selling film cannot easily welcome a world with no film in it. The genius of the model and the blindness of the company were, from the very beginning, the same thing seen from two different angles. This model made the company enormous. At its height, it employed well over 60,000 people. It ran factories and processing labs across the country and around the world. Its yellow boxes sat in every drugstore. Its name was one of the most recognized on Earth. It was, by every visible measure, one of the great success stories of American industry, a company so dominant in its field that it was hard to imagine anything ever replacing it. But that dominance carried a hidden condition, one that would eventually become a trap. The company's entire fortune depended on a single assumption, that a photograph would always be a physical thing, printed on paper, made from film. Everything it owned, everything it knew, every factory and every profit margin was built on that one idea. And an idea, no matter how profitable, is a dangerous thing to build a giant upon because ideas can change overnight, and giants cannot. For decades, though, the assumption held, and the company reigned. Its scientists were among the best in the world at the chemistry of images. Its brand was trusted so completely that its name became a shorthand for the perfect moment worth saving. Competitors existed, but none could match its scale, its distribution, or the sheer gravitational pull of being the default choice in nearly every home. Its laboratories were legendary. This was not a company that survived on marketing and habit alone. It was a genuine powerhouse of invention, holding thousands of patents and pushing the science of imaging forward year after year. Working there carried real prestige. Its researchers were the kind of people who did not just refine what existed, they built things the world had never seen. That is the detail that makes what follows so painful. The company was not defeated because it lacked the brains to invent the future. It had exactly the brains required. The problem was never the laboratory. The problem was the boardroom that received what the laboratory built. The company's strength was not an illusion. It was real and it was earned, built on genuine science and decades of relentless refinement. It had the research budget of a small nation and some of the finest minds in imaging working inside its laboratories. If any company on Earth was equipped to see the next revolution in pictures coming, it was this one. In fact, it was better positioned than anyone, because the revolution would not arrive from outside. It would be born inside its own walls. And here is the quiet tragedy at the center of the story. The very research operation that made the company great, that army of brilliant engineers, funded by all that film money, was exactly the thing that would hand the company its death sentence, wrapped as a gift. The strength and the weakness were the same organ. The company was rich enough and smart enough to invent the future. It was just not brave enough to sell it. In 1975, a young engineer inside the company assembled something that had never existed before, a working camera that used no film at all. It captured light electronically and recorded the image as data. The first picture took a fraction of a second to expose, and then some 23 seconds to save. It was slow and it was rough, but it was, unmistakably, a photograph made without a single molecule of film. It was the first digital camera in the world, and it had been built by the company that sold more film than anyone alive. When the engineer showed it to the company's leadership, the reaction was not excitement. It was unease. They looked at a device that needed no film, no paper, no chemicals, no developing, and they saw correctly a machine designed to destroy the exact thing that made them rich. One version of the moment has an executive calling it a cute idea and telling him not to talk about it. The invention was not celebrated. It was quietly filed away, treated as a curiosity rather than a warning. But the company was too intelligent to simply forget it. A few years later, in 1979, someone inside wrote an internal report that laid out the future with startling accuracy. It predicted that digital imaging could begin to replace film, and it even estimated roughly when, around the year 2010. Read that again. The company did not stumble blindly into the digital age. It forecast the digital age in writing with a date attached. More than 30 years in advance, it had the map. It knew where the road led. Think about how rare that is. Most companies that are destroyed by change can at least say they never saw it coming. This one could not. It had done the analysis, reached the correct conclusion, and even set an approximate date on its own obsolescence, and then it locked the report in a filing cabinet and went back to selling film. The warning did not fail because it was wrong. It failed because it was inconvenient. Knowing the future, it turns out, is not the hard part. Acting on a future that threatens your present paycheck is the hard part. And it is where almost everyone, and almost every company, quietly loses their nerve. And it chose not to walk it. The logic in the short term was almost reasonable. Film was astonishingly profitable. Digital at first was not. The cameras were expensive to develop and the margins were thin or non-existent. Every dollar spent pushing digital was a dollar spent attacking the company's own golden goose. So leadership hesitated and hedged and protected the present. They treated their own invention as a threat to be managed rather than a future to be seized. They had built the lifeboat and then refused to get in because the ship they were standing on was still warm and comfortable and full of gold. The future does not wait for permission. Other companies with nothing to protect took the idea the company had shelved and ran with it. Digital cameras improved, then got cheaper, then got good, then got everywhere. And when the shift finally came, it came not as a slow tide but as a collapse. People simply stopped buying film. The endless river of repeating payments, the very thing that had made the company one of the most profitable on earth, began to dry up almost all at once. The company tried belatedly to compete in digital, but it was fighting on ground it had surrendered years earlier. Even where it managed to sell digital cameras, the profits were thin. Its share of the digital camera market in the United States fell from around 24% in 2005 to just 7% by 2010, and even those sales barely made money. It was losing the old business it had dominated and failing to win the new business it had literally invented. There was nowhere left to stand. The human cost arrived in waves. Beginning in the early 2000s, the company closed something like 13 manufacturing plants and around 130 of its processing labs. It cut roughly 47,000 jobs. A workforce that had once numbered nearly 64,000 shrank toward 17,000. Each closed lab and each lost job was a small piece of an empire built over a century being dismantled in a decade, undone not by a competitor's genius, but by its own refusal to compete with itself. These were not abstract numbers. They were the engineers, the chemists, the line workers, and the technicians who had spent careers making the company great, many of them in the towns that had grown up around its factories, places where nearly everyone knew someone who worked there. When the plants went quiet, entire communities felt the silence. And the cruelest part was that none of it came from a failure of effort or skill on their part. The people at the bottom paid the full price for a decision made at the top decades earlier. The decision to protect the film business by refusing to build the future their own colleagues had already invented. On January 19, 2012, the company filed for bankruptcy protection. To keep operating, it secured a credit line of roughly $950 million. Its filings told the story in cold arithmetic. Around $5.1 billion in assets against roughly $6.8 billion in liabilities. The company that had taught the world how to remember would emerge from bankruptcy the following year as a small shadow of itself. Focused on commercial printing, its century of dominance in consumer photography effectively over. It is easy and wrong to call this a story about a company that failed to see the future. That is the opposite of what happened. The company saw the future with extraordinary clarity. It invented the future. It wrote the future down in an internal memo complete with a date, decades before it arrived. Its failure was not blindness. Its failure was something far more common and far more human. It could see exactly where the world was going, and it could not bring itself to go there because the present was too profitable to abandon. This is the hardest kind of disruption to survive because it does not come from a rival. It comes from inside, from your own laboratory, your own engineers, your own better idea. To embrace it, a successful company has to be willing to destroy its most profitable business before someone else does. It has to attack itself on purpose while the money is still flowing. Almost no organization is built to do that. Every incentive, every quarterly number, every comfortable executive points the other way, toward protecting what works today, even when what works today is quietly dying. That is the trap, and it is not really about cameras or film at all. It is about what happens when a company's greatest strength and its fatal weakness turn out to be the same thing. The profit that funds the invention is the same profit the invention threatens. The scale that makes a company dominant is the same scale that makes it impossible to turn. Success does not just fail to protect against this kind of collapse. Success is the very thing that causes it. You can see the same shape in company after company across every industry whenever a comfortable leader is handed the tool of its own replacement. The taxi giant that could have built the ride-hailing app. The retailer that could have owned online shopping. The pattern almost never changes. The incumbent sees the threat, sometimes even builds the answer, and then flinches, because embracing it means burning down a business that is still, for now, making money. It is one of the most reliable stories in all of commerce, and this company wrote perhaps its purest version because it did not merely fail to adapt. It invented the future, described it in a memo, and still could not make itself move. The company had it all. The science, the talent, the brand, the money, and most damning of all, the answer, invented in its own building more than 30 years before the reckoning came. It did not lose because it was slow or foolish or poor. It lost because it was winning and could not imagine stopping. The machine that could have saved it sat in a drawer, built by its own hands, while the company walked calmly toward the ending it had already seen and already described. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. It describes a corporate bankruptcy and a series of lawful business decisions, and makes no allegation of criminal wrongdoing by any individual or company. All figures are drawn from publicly available reporting and financial filings from credentialed sources, and source links are provided above.